Welcome to a new episode of the Animal Liberation Hour, where we bring you inspiring stories from revolutionaries who are changing the world for all animals. My name is Shriya, and I am thrilled to be your host for today. I had the best time talking to Meredith Marin, the founder and CEO of Vegan Hospitality, a high-impact hospitality consulting training program. Through this program, Meredith has trained consultants across the globe, empowering them to work with businesses within their local communities and help them step up their plant-powered game. She's also a mindfulness coach, leads vegan leadership training courses, and is someone who I am so proud to call my dear friend and mentor. It's only fitting that I seize the opportunity to have her on this podcast for a fun, enlightening chat. Before we get into this episode, I want to remind you that the Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists find their voice in the movement and take their activism to a whole nother level. From one-on-one mentorships to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight the good fight for all Earthlings. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on social media. That's Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can also keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM socials as well. Animal Activism Mentorship is so honored and proud to be fueled by Farm Animal Rights Movement. And now I bring you my fairy god mentor, Meredith Marin. I must say that I always refer to you as my fairy god mentor, so I couldn't have asked for a better guest to interview on this podcast. Welcome, Meredith. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and your personal life to chat with me today.
Oh, you are so sweet. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
Yay, yeah, of course. I'm sure we're going to get into all of the wonderful things that you do, but I just want to give a little brief intro with how I met Meredith. I fortuitously came across her vegan hospitality a training program, and it sounded like something that I was really passionate about, and I'm still very much passionate about, is helping restaurants step up their vegan game, so to speak. And she was offering a course training people how to do that. And what started off with the question about just some inquiries about the program ended up morphing into one of the most wonderful relationships that I have created in my life. And I'm so grateful to have you as a mentor in every which way, and you're just so amazing, and I'm excited for everyone to be inspired by you. So without any further delay, let's get started with, I would love to know where your connection with animals first started and how, if that played into your embracing a vegan lifestyle, or what your animal rights story and your vegan story intersect.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when you first said that, using that language, where did my animal connection start? I thought of dead animals. I didn't think of living animals. I come from a family of butchers, and it's such a weird image to think of myself. I have memories being in a butcher's kitchen in my grandfather's store and seeing hanging dead carcasses. And probably everyone's going to stop listening to this podcast right now. Like, I don't want to hear about this. So sorry. But I grew up in New York City and on Long Island, and I didn't have a lot of contact with animals. I don't really remember even having a lot of contact with vegetables. I didn't really go to farms. I didn't have a lot of context on where the food came from. It was more so, the supermarket experience. Where does food come from? Oh, the supermarket, which is what a lot of New York City kids will tell you. So my connection with animals, I do remember as a kid, I watched that TV show Lamb Chop. I don't know if that was something that you ever saw, but it's there was like a little lamb puppet called Lamb Chop. And that was the first time I remember actually making a connection between the animal itself and the food, because I heard people saying they're eating lamb chops. And so I think at that point I wasn't super interested in eating meat, but it was such a part of my family culture that I didn't really make any drastic changes. I also had an eating disorder I was working through in high school, and that affected a lot of the ways that I was eating. So the idea of being vegan, I mean, it wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't until I went to college when I was 18. I went to school in New York City, and I had this experience that it kind of enlightened me and brought me closer to this connection with animals in a kind of strange way. But I'll tell you the story. And Shriya, I know you already know the story, but I'll tell the listeners the story.
Really cool. Yeah, it's a very unique story.
It's a strange entry into animal activism, but I had this experience where I had a good friend of mine who was living in my dorm, and he knocked on my door one night and he told me this story that had just happened to him. He was in the subway station and he saw a man walking on the tracks, and he went over to try to help the man. It was a deaf immigrant from Bangladesh who was working on the tracks, and he went over and, tried to like help him get out. My friend Eric had his arms on this man when the train came and hit him across the platform. Not my friend, he hit the man. And Eric followed the man to the hospital, and the man passed away. So Eric was knocking on my door to raise money because he decided to start a fund for the guy's family in Bangladesh. And I was so touched by this story. I don't know, it was like just the right time that I in my life. Like I was just in college, my first semester. I think I was reading some books about spirituality, just trying to become my own person, figure out what I believed, and what I, really like be able to follow my own values and not be stuck in the values that I grew up with from my parents' house. And I was really moved by this. So I said, let me help you. And we went door to door and we tried to raise money. And I wrote an email to everyone I knew and tried to get them to spend money and, help this family. And I raised a measly $35 that night. And I just felt so disappointed and defeated and helpless. And I remember that feeling so just, it really hits me. I felt so helpless. Like, what can I do as one person? This is such an unjust, tragic thing. This guy didn't need to die. He was deaf and he was looking for his hearing aid. It just seemed so unfair. And somewhere in my 18-year-old brain, I made this connection that, wait a second, if I want to appreciate life and, not take lives for granted, I need to look at what is on my plate. And I realized I was taking lives potentially 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And really, I wish I could go back and talk to my 18-year-old self and figure out, like, how did you make that connection? Because it does seem strange, but I guess I thought, well, what can I do as an individual? I can't go saving human lives. I can't, I don't know. I just felt like this is something I can do. And I think it is something everyone can do. It's such an interesting thing that we all have this power to not participate in that system, not purchase that, not purchase lives on our plates, and we get to choose that. So I was able to choose that. At that point, I didn't know what veganism was. I was vegetarian for my years of college. And then I had some health issues, had a lot of confusion, was told by a doctor to start eating meat again. And so I did for a short amount of time until I started researching nutrition, learning about health, because it didn't make sense to me that I would need to eat animals to be healthy. And I started learning. I watched some documentaries, read some books, and then ultimately started my vegan journey. That was back in around 2010. So yeah, around 11 years ago now. And it was a slow transition for me. So my husband now, who was my boyfriend at the time, he decided to do that transition with me. And so we started as vegetarian again. And we were living in the Netherlands at the time. So there was a lot of cheese involved, a lot of little cheese shops. But what was something interesting about living there is that we were riding our bikes everywhere, and we were able to see the food in a way that I think neither of us had ever experienced before, because we were going to farms, like actual vegetable farms, and picking our food. There was a farm for everything. There was like a cherry farm where you just got the cherries and they made cherry wine. And, the Netherlands is such a beautiful mecca for fresh food. And I remember I would ride my bike every day past the field of cows and see the cows grazing. And it just was so obvious to me that those were animals that deserved to live. And I had no interest in eating them. And so as I learned more, as we both learned more about health and nutrition and realized you can be healthy as a vegan, started learning about veganism. We started our vegan transition together. But I would say it wasn't until 2016 when I had my daughter. So I have a 5.5-year-old now. And that's when we were eating plant-based for a long time, 6 or 7 years before I feel like I can really call myself a vegan, because I didn't have that emotional connection with the dairy and the egg part of things until I had Verilina and breastfed her. And I had a kind of a tumultuous breastfeeding journey in the beginning. It was really hard, and with the pumping and the just everything. And I was like, wait a second, this is what we do to cows, but we take their kids away. And then, even though I knew, I wasn't really eating dairy anyway, and I knew it was wrong, it's more of a connection. And I was just like, wow, not only am I never eating that again or purchasing that again, but I need to just tell everyone I know what's going on and make sure that everyone I know doesn't do that either. And so that's when, so that was 5 or 6 years ago when I would say I became really vegan, activist-y, and also more knowledgeable. I wanted to research everything and, what's what I learned about the wine processing and how some wines are not vegan, and just all the details you learn when you start going down that research rabbit hole. I started learning from other activists and reading their content. And so that's been such an amazing journey. And I think, just like you would say, it's been the best part of my life, the best decision you could make to go vegan. Going vegan totally changed my life. Being an activist changed my life. I think it's just made my life so much better in many ways.
Yeah, and that's even now when I hear this story, I'm like, whoa, that's so remarkable. And I'm also curious about what your 18-year-old self had going on in her mind when she made that connection. It's interesting. And I think, like you said, it was just, you were in a position where you were ready to hear that, or hear yourself make that decision.
I just had a lot of care in my heart at that time. And I remember around that same time, I would go into my cafeteria in the dorm room cafeteria, and I would just make sandwiches. I would go in and steal 10 peanut butter sandwiches and just go bring them to people who didn't have homes, people who were living in the parks. And I just was handing them out every time I went into the cafeteria. I was like, how can I not take food from here and give it out to people that need it? And it was just, I think it was part of that. It was just extended just that social justice lens of wanting to do everything I possibly could to help. And especially being in a big city, you're just faced with so much of the issues all of a sudden. Oh, wow, this is so much bigger than me. What can I do as one small person?
Absolutely. And you mentioned your 5.5-year-old daughter, and how she, her presence and your experience breastfeeding her was instrumental in making that switch from just plant-based or plant-forward to, full-on vegan, connecting with everything. So how does she find being a vegan kid and growing up in a vegan household? What is it like for her?
It's been really interesting raising a vegan kid. I think people think it's going to be so hard for them to be different from everyone else. But what I've found more is not so much explaining to her why she's vegan, but explaining to her why everyone else isn't. And, because she's never once said she didn't want to be vegan. She's always she's very firm in her belief. She totally understands the way we raise her. And she thinks it's bizarre that anyone would want to eat an animal. But it's been a gradual process to clue her into the realities of life and what everyone is doing. And the way I've approached it is really just to allow her to be curious and to respond to her questions as whatever comes up, rather than feeling like I need to provide information for her. Just respond to whatever she's observing herself. And that's not just with veganism, but with just everything she's experienced in the world. She said to me last night, she's like, I noticed that there's only a bathroom for men and a bathroom there's one with a dress on it for women. Where do the non-binary people go to the bathroom? And I was like, that's such a great observation. Let's talk about that, but just giving her the language and then letting her ask the questions has worked really well.
That is,
and we've been lucky with we have a lot of vegan friends as well. So she's had vegan friends her age, and she knows she's not the only one.
Yeah. Wow. That is I follow your stories, of course, on Instagram, and you post the little tidbits of wise questions that your daughter asks, which is always remarkable to me. I'm like, wow, she's asking good questions, and you're also so respectful of her questions, and you let her ask questions. You let her, and it's not even like you quote unquote let her. You're empowering her and you're encouraging her, and that's so important. And I just have to thank you for being that for her. And
Well, I think it does come back to mentorship. Like I've had some great mentors in my life, and the ones that were most impactful for me were the ones that encouraged me to ask questions, and the ones that said to me, like, that's a really good question. You should keep thinking about that, and that's, I think, what I try to be for my daughter is like, not to necessarily feel like I need to have all the answers, but just to say to her, I'm so glad we're talking about this. Thank you so much for bringing this up to me. I have questions about that too, and we should keep talking about it.
Yeah, make them feel validated, and there's a lot of strength to doing that. The way you express how you interact with your kid and how you interact with just other people, like living in a non-vegan world. I find that you bring your background in social work and your science and your psychology background into really being productive in how you show up in this world. So I would love to hear about that and how that's affected your way as communicating veganism shows up in your day-to-day life.
Totally. I mean, mindfulness has been the biggest background for me as far as the way that I like the framework I like to approach things in life. Mindfulness for me, meaning that I'm able to stay in the present moment and observe myself in a non-judgmental way. And that allows me to then I try my best to also observe other people in a non-judgmental way. And I think, interpersonal relations is so important, especially if you want to be influential to other people, if you want to influence the world and the way it works, you have to be liked in some way. Like you have to be able to sit in a conversation with someone that maybe has different opinions from you and not make them feel isolated and rejected. And so like I was a therapist before I was an entrepreneur, and I was also a community organizer. I led a lot of workshops, facilitated a lot of community events, and I had to create safe spaces for people to have difficult conversations. So my social work background absolutely influences everything I do. It influences the way I teach people. I built it into my hospitality training program from the very beginning, and then expanded into even more of a mindfulness focus, as you know. So it's been extremely important, and I think that is something that many vegan activists could benefit from learning, is just how to start by relating to themselves in a more positive, optimistic, mindful way before they try to empathize with others. Because I do see, like, I follow a lot of vegan Facebook groups and posts, and, there's a lot of emotions and a lot of anger and a lot of judgment. And I'm not saying we shouldn't judge people that eat meat. Like, obviously we're going to have our judgments there. We judge and think that they shouldn't do that. Duh. But the way that we internalize it and the way that we judge ourselves, like, often mirrors the way that our capacity to interact with other people in a influential or positive way. So it does start with the self.
Yeah, I remember during the coaching workshop that I took with you after the hospitality one, when we would talk about, and for me frequently, one thing that I would talk about is me judging myself for how good or bad of an activist I thought I was, and not being able to make one person understand, or maybe they understand but not getting them to have their actions reflect that they understand the horrors of what the animals are experiencing, and just really stress over that. And then you would say the M word of the magic mindfulness word, and some days I'd be like, oh yes, I need to come back to that. But there are some days being like, no, I don't want to be mindful. I just want everyone to just get it right now.
You can be mindful and have those thoughts, because what you're doing is just saying, I'm noticing I'm having a thought that's telling me I really want everyone to get it right now. And I'm noticing that thought makes me feel angry or makes me feel frustrated. And then I can validate that I feel that way. Like, and okay, I feel that way. Like, what do I want to do with those feelings? So that's like, it's okay to have those thoughts and feelings, but the mindfulness part is being aware that they exist.
Yeah. And what you do next is that's sort of where we have power, where I think we tend to oversee that we have that power to control what we do next. And often when in, say we're in a protest and someone says something and it's like that heat of the moment, it's so hard to take a step back and do the whole, it seems like a process to take a step back and be mindful and see what's coming up for you. You just want to respond in the moment. And whether or not that's is that a helpful interaction? Is it not helpful? You never know. So is there something that you would suggest within those kinds of scenarios, which are probably frequent when you're in any social justice movement? Because we're all heated. There's one group fighting to liberate another, and there's another group who just finds our presence there a nuisance because we're being loud and noisy and disruptive, and there's a lot happening, and to really sit and take all of that in it's overwhelming to say the least. So what do you feel would show up, or what do you feel would be the best way, or I guess the least destructive way for an activist to show up in these spaces?
I mean, first I want to just say that none of us are going to do this perfectly. I certainly sometimes have experiences where I just can't help myself and I just have to say something. And I know it's not going to be helpful, either whether that's online, responding to a comments thread that I know nobody cares what I have to say, but I just am like, I got to be that angry vegan right now. And, or in a family dinner setting or whatever. I mean, there are absolutely times when I'm like, I could be mindful right now and I'm choosing not to be. And that's just because I'm a human being. So we're not going to do it perfectly. And I think we need to have compassion for ourselves and realize that. But I think things that we can do to prepare for those moments are to use visioning as a skill. So visioning is a wonderful tool where we can actually imagine ourselves in a situation before it happens and imagine it going successfully. So preparing yourself, like if you're going to go to a protest, like think through the situation and imagine yourself in a situation that might be challenging for you. And how would you ideally like to respond? And you can think through, well, if I respond this way, what might happen? If I respond this way, what might happen? And how's that going to be for me? Like, how's that going to be for my experience? And how's it going to be for the animals? Because they don't, the animals aren't there, and it's not you yelling at someone who's not going to listen is maybe not going to help you or the animals. So I think visioning, thinking it through, and then also having you can call it a mantra or some sort of helpful statement that you can say to yourself that it's going to be different for everybody, but something that's personal to you, that's going to impact you, that will help you calm down and be mindful in that moment. So it could be something to reconnect you with your values, or something to just say like, it's going to be okay, or whatever that statement is for you. Or what I like to remind myself of is it's not about me, or this is bigger than me, or I'm doing my best. So something that you can remind yourself, and then practice saying that to yourself so that it comes up naturally when you need it, when you need to hear it. You can be that compassionate voice for yourself, but it does take work. It's not going to come automatically if you've never been a compassionate voice for yourself before. So it's something that you have to practice doing, and the more you practice, the more it'll come up in times that you need it.
Totally. Yeah. And that's, one thing that I do like to say to myself is, is this going to help the animals? And something that I always, always, always keep in the forefront is their liberation is our feedback. So how good we are as activists, how effective we are with our strategies. The only way I'm going to know how good it is how effective it is in getting them free. And that's what it is. And if that's what's going to help me maybe not call someone, just a terrible person, and or that could be having a very constructive conversation. Someone can say something hurtful, and that can still evolve into a good conversation. You never know.
Yeah, I also think that a lot of times as vegan activists, we really put the animals as like our only driving factor for activism. And obviously that's the main factor. We want to liberate animals, but there are other reasons why living in a vegan world would be something that would be useful for humanity, or for us as vegans. I mean, personally, my activism, I have a lot of ways I do activism, but also like my primary business, which was an activism project, which was starting out as a restaurant consultant, working with restaurants and hotels to help them make vegan menus. the goal of that primarily wasn't actually animal liberation, because me, changing menus wasn't actually going to save animals, but my goal was to help vegans. So like that was my activism goal. I'm going to make it easier for vegans to be vegan. I'm going to make it more pleasant experience to be vegan so that more people want to be vegan and feel comfortable being vegan. And yeah, that might indirectly impact, animals, obviously, if more people go vegan. And veganism needs to be accessible around the world in order to actually have a vegan world. But we do need to remember ourselves, like as individuals and as a community, that we deserve to live wonderful lives too. And how great is it that we get to fight for animal liberation while living wonderful lives? But we need to also remember that as activists, like we have to take care of ourselves too and take care of our own needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought up the restaurant consulting business, as that's a perfect segue into that conversation as to how where did that come from? Like, what void did you see needed filling, and you decided to step from, not step away from the social work that you were doing, but really embark on starting your own entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, well, that was around the same time, around 2016, when I had my daughter, and we moved to Aruba, which is a little beautiful Caribbean island where my husband is from.
You
And
moved from the Netherlands to Aruba?
No, we lived in New York. So we were in the Netherlands, then we moved to New York. We were there for 6 years, and then we moved to Aruba. And so I studied social work when I was in New York and worked in community health. And then we got to Aruba as like vegans, is most pretty much plant-based at the time, and then starting to make that connection with veganism, and realized that it was going to be a challenge to eat the way that we wanted to eat. And we were not willing to compromise our values, after working so hard to build a lifestyle that made sense for us. I remember sitting at my mother-in-law's table. We lived with my mother-in-law for 3 months before we got our own place, and her having fish on the table, thinking that that was vegetarian, or think like, she didn't know the word vegan. I don't know if we even really explained it at that point. And just being like, what do I do with this? Like, what do I, like, how do I talk about this? I didn't want to be rude, but obviously I wasn't going to eat it. And just, it took me a couple of weeks to find my voice and figure out, how do I speak to my new family? How do I speak to this community about getting my needs met and my values? And so it started out as just me needing to advocate for myself. And I would go out to eat, have all of those difficult conversations that vegans constantly have, first with the person on the phone. And when you ask, hey, do you have any vegan options? Oh, sure, we'll make you something. And then you show up at the restaurant and the server is like, what are you talking about? And then they bring you the wrong food, and then you speak to the chef. And, it's a very involved situation that can cause a lot of frustration. And I started to realize I was feeling just really anxious every time I went out to eat, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I thought, this is unfair. Like, there was also that sense of injustice there. I was like, this is unfair. We're paying a lot of money for this food. Like, and I felt like this is unfair that guests have to be forced to be cruel to animals just to eat at a restaurant. Like, that does not seem fair to me. And I wanted restaurants to understand that. Like, you are, by not putting a vegan option on your menu, you are literally forcing people to abuse animals. That makes no sense. So I started being vocal about that. And I started talking to chefs and talking to restaurant managers and owners and telling everyone I knew about how unfair this was and how they needed to change. And then I started an Instagram account called Vegan Aruba to try to rally the vegan community, because I didn't know anyone there. There wasn't much of a vegan community. There was like a handful of vegans. And one vegan woman who was making like some vegan food and selling it out of her house, but that was basically it at the time. And we were, I was trying to organize the community and use my social work skills to build a movement. And I started to get a following of people on Instagram. And the nice thing about Aruba is it's like a small town. There's only like 150,000 people there. And so when there's anything new that pops up, people are curious about it. And I was getting a following of people that were not vegan. I mean, because there weren't that many vegans there. So I was just getting general public looking at what I was doing, and I was showing them recipes and being like, look, you can be vegan in this island. I know it's hard. I know the vegetables don't grow here because it's a desert like climate. We're getting a lot of expensive imported food. Like, I know it's hard. However, you can do it. And I'm going to show you how. And then things just started rolling in. Like, I started getting invited to do workshops and teach people how to be vegan. And I did private cooking classes. And eventually, I mean, just so much happened. I taught at the culinary school, and I did festivals, and I spoke for the government, and I started this consulting business and worked with restaurants and hotels. And I trained, hundreds of hundreds of hospitality professionals from Marriott to Hilton to, every place you can think of that was on this touristic island. And Aruba became the most vegan friendly island in the Caribbean within just a couple of years. And it's still going strong. Yeah, it was just this like whirlwind, amazing experience where, and at the time I was also teaching part-time. I started teaching part-time in the social work program at the university, and I was teaching community empowerment. I was also teaching advocacy, new media, and change. And I was teaching a psychology course, and I was using my vegan activism as kind of a social experiment to infuse into my lessons and figure out like, okay, this is for me, it was really like a sociological experiment, and how amazing it was that we were making changes and growing the vegan community while also growing the vegan tourist community and growing the vegan ally community, which I think is something often overlooked by vegan activists, that maybe, yes, it's nice to change people's minds and turn them vegan, and how great if they turn vegan right away when you have that conversation. But there's this other population of people that are potential allies to the vegan community that are not necessarily going to go vegan at any point or right away, but they want to support vegans. And so if they have a position of power, whether that's in education or healthcare or hospitality, they can make decisions that actually benefit vegans and then by default benefit animals. And so I think we also need to remember that as activists, that we should grow allies relationships. And that's what I do with hospitality. I'm not going into restaurants telling everyone there to go vegan, but I'm teaching them about the vegan customer. And then by default, they all become allies. And a lot of them do go vegan themselves when they realize that this is a possibility for them, and they learn things they didn't know before.
I always love hearing that story. And with your experience working with restaurants and chefs and all of these, these high-end people in the hospitality space who are not vegan, have you veganized any of them, or at least made them go plant-based as far as their food is concerned?
Yes, actually one of the first chefs I worked with, so I didn't make him go plant-based, but he was the first chef who I did a menu evaluation for. We looked at his menu and thought, where can we add vegan options? And he was interested, and we were talking about why people go vegan. And I brought up many of the reasons. And for some reason, the sustainability reason, or like the planetary reasons, were impactful for him when he heard about that. He had 2 sons and said, I want a future for them. So he said, I'm not going to be involved with the beef industry anymore and the dairy industry. So personally, he stopped eating cows and he stopped consuming dairy just on his own because he felt like it. He didn't make a full connection. He's still a chef and he's still serving meat in his restaurants, but he made that one shift because of that conversation. And I did a supermarket training once, and I had 6 people in the training, from managers, supervisors, cashiers, and then 3 people from that training told me they started their vegan journey after learning about what's in their food and how to read ingredients labels and why people go vegan. And I've had several other experiences, mostly with service staff in restaurants, where they just learn more and they're curious and they go and research, and they either for themselves or for their kids, they find out that actually it is healthy to be vegan and that they can actually do it, and they start that journey.
Yeah, that's that kind of feedback is always so wonderful to hear, and it's kind of that positive feedback loop that keeps us going too, knowing that we're having that impact, and inspires us to keep doing that work. And so once you started, because you were consulting with these businesses firsthand, at what point did you decide you wanted to train others to do the same? So amplify your mission, so to speak.
Yeah, so it wasn't actually something that came from me. It was something that came from the vegan community. I started developing this Instagram following that was larger than Aruba, and people around the world were checking in to see what was going on in Aruba. And they were curious about this new kind of activism. And I started to get messages from people. First, it started from people who visited Aruba and then went home to their hometowns. And they were like, whoa, like we experienced this really cool place in Aruba where you could go to these mainstream restaurants and have vegan menus. And then I go back to, people were like New York, San Francisco, like major cities. I mean, at the time, I guess it was still kind of new. And they were like, we can only find vegan food at vegan restaurants, and we can't always go to vegan restaurants. We want to go out with our families that aren't vegan, or we want to go to the random place on the down the street from our work and find vegan food. So how did you do this? And how can we do this in my place. And first people were like, can you come to my place and do this there? And I was like, I remember saying to Andre, my husband, like, should we travel around the world and veganize places? And then I was like, I don't think so. Because
that
part of
great to me.
It sounded fun. I was like, I could pitch it as a reality show, it sounded like fun, but pretty quickly, I realized that wasn't part of my value system, because as a social worker, I learned very concretely that, my goal is to empower the local communities, not to go and bring my agenda to them. And so like, I happened to be part of the Aruban community living there, and I was able to organize the local community and involve them in what I was doing. But to go to other places and do that intentionally didn't seem ethical to me. So what I wanted to do was find a way to empower locals in their own communities to create these changes, but give them the tools they needed in order to actually make that work. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll start a YouTube channel, or maybe I'll make like a pamphlet or an ebook and I can hand that out. So I had a couple conversations with some early people that they were just like, can I please just like tap your brain, like get on the phone with me for an hour? And I had some early conversations with people who just had questions for me on how did I do this? They wanted to start their businesses. And I said, sure, no problem, let's do it. And through these conversations, I realized I had so much knowledge and I had just built so much of a method that it was not possible to transfer this information in a YouTube video or in a pamphlet. So I started writing it down and looking at like, what is the actual method I used with these restaurants. By that time, I had already worked with, I think, like 7 restaurants when I started building the program. And I also had a business coach myself that I had just started working with at the time, who was a great mentor to me. She's a person who was visiting Aruba and staying at a hotel that I had worked with and made the menu for. And she contacted me on Instagram and she was like, can you just come and I want to take you out to lunch and thank you for the great work you did here. I'm like, sure. So I had lunch with her and her husband.
Was she vegan?
Yeah. So she was vegan. Her husband is vegan. This is Amanda Rose, the woman who does the speaker trainings. And so I didn't know what she did at the time. She's a person. And I went to lunch with her and she was like, by the way, I do speaking coaching. I can help people create speeches. And at the time I was doing some speeches for the hotel association and leadership teams at hotels. And I was like, she's like, I'll help you for free. I just want to help, give back to the vegan community in Aruba. And I was like, I'll take it. So one of my tips for people who want to get mentored is that if people offer you free support, you should take it. Because a lot of times people don't take these things. They think that they're not worth it, or they think that, it's too much work, or then they're going to like owe them something. Or no, when people offer you stuff for free, take the stuff and use it, and then you'll give it back to someone else in the future.
Yeah,
so I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I did a coaching training with her. I took her speaker course, and then she coached me for free, I think for like 6 months. And really, she helped me build this program through some of the, she'd been coaching a lot of other coaches. So she helped me build coaching into my program, and she helped me structure it by helping me learn from her and the things that she was doing. And so at that time, when she was coaching me and I was trying to say, like, I want to help other people, I want to teach people how to do this. And I really think there's people that want this, although I was like, I don't know if people will pay me to train them to do it, but I can't do it for free because 3 months of teaching people sounds like a lot of work. I need to be able to support myself. I was actually taking a step back from working with the restaurants at the time so I could run this program. So, she encouraged me to go for it and helped me figure it all out. And so I built a really well-structured 12-week program that has evolved. I started it at the end of 2019. So it's been going on for almost 2 years now, and mostly throughout the pandemic, actually, which is interesting. But it's all virtual, and so it's very robust. It's evolved and grown, and I have an amazing alumni network of people that I keep in touch with that are doing this work all over the world in different forms, different capacities. And I don't even remember what your initial question was, but I think it was, how did I start this program? So it started because people wanted it. And that's kind of been like what I've been doing ever since, related to just my vegan activism and my support for the vegan community, because I ended up launching a more mindfulness focused coaching program from that hospitality program, because I noticed that as I'm training entrepreneurs, something that they can really benefit from is the more mindfulness, personal, like life coaching kind of training, because there's so much internal stuff that stops us from taking action. And I know I had benefited from the coaching, and just we need to be able to be confident within ourselves to take action to help other people, to help the world, and also to do something that's so unique and different that, vegan consulting, it's such a new field, and we need to have that support and that confidence within ourselves to be able to actually take action on that. Or you learn all these skills and then you end up sitting with it and doing nothing. And that's, such a tragedy. So I wanted to support people in the best way I could. And I also wanted to support people that didn't necessarily want to go into hospitality, but wanted to learn the mindfulness tools to become more of leaders in the vegan community. So I ran a vegan leadership program, and I also have a vegan leadership course. That's a self-study course that I offer that has all those same tools as well. So yeah, every program I've built so far has been mostly just because people want it. The next program I'm thinking of building is going to be probably a trauma-focused coaching program related to vegans who are experiencing secondary trauma as activists. And it'll, be a little bit similar to the mindfulness course, but much more focused on specific symptoms that people are experiencing, and creating a method for them to actually overcome that and heal from that, so they can move forward and be better activists and just, feel more confident in themselves. So that's something I'm thinking about doing. I don't know if it'll be this year or next year, but it's definitely something that I've started to see the demand for and the need for in the community.
Oh, wow. I think that's going to be a very, very important, crucial tool, because I feel as activists, it's easy to, kind of shove our trauma and our discomfort under the rug, because rightfully so, the animals have it worse. They're the ones directly experiencing it. But that doesn't mean that our secondary trauma isn't affecting us. It's still affecting us. And that means we're not able to show up for them in any capacity as well. So it's not good for us and it's not good for them. And knowing how to really in a healthy way cope through that, and especially that support coming from another vegan who really gets it, is going to be really important. So I hope that's a course that you do work on when you're able to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we have these two areas of trauma. I think as vegans, there's the one area where when we become activists, we become exposed to a lot of the cruelty going on. And the secondary trauma part of it is that we're bearing witness to someone else's trauma. And so that obviously affects people, in very profound ways. And then I think also a lot of vegans come into this experience with their own traumas from their own lives. And that's also going to be triggered by the feelings of helplessness that come sometimes in the transition to veganism. And what I really connect with is just remembering my feeling of helplessness when I first became vegetarian. And that's what really actually spawned my need to feel like I needed to do something, was I felt so helpless. And I actually think a lot of people go vegan from that feeling, because they just feel helpless for the animals, and they feel like, helpless in their own lives in many ways. And there's this, I have this theory that vegans, they want to be recognized and heard and seen by people, by their families, I think a lot of vegans just feel like in their own lives, they're not being heard. And then they see the animals who are like the epitome of that situation. Like, oh, wow, like they're really not being heard. And if people can't even look at a beautiful, cute little baby pig or calf and feel their pain, who's gonna witness and acknowledge my suffering? And I think there's we got a lot of transference between our feelings and the animals' feelings. And that does cause a lot of vegans to anthropomorphize animals and and feel that connection. But it's so personal, because we also really feel deeply that helpless feeling and want people to witness our pain and suffering and acknowledge it. And we live in such a world where pain and suffering is hidden and on purpose, and especially with the animals, it's like that grand representation of our hidden suffering. And I'm even getting too deep here, but
no, now I'm like, this is getting really I sense a very strong metaphor building up here. I've never really thought of it that way, and that's a very fascinating perspective of transference and finding that connection outside of just this is how we're treating them is wrong, but also making some sort of personal connection, which is also fine. It's not like there's so many entry points.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a logically death
Sure,
is murder's wrong. Like that's pretty logical.
I know, yeah.
But then there's also that emotional.
I agree on that.
There's also that emotional connection, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So all of these courses that you're offering, one of the things that really stood out to me was that mindfulness element, and it felt so unique. It wasn't just, hey, you come in at this time, you do your classes, you watch these videos, you do your homework, and then you forget about it. It was very like we started off the course with a mindfulness practice, and it wasn't, for the lack of a better term, woo woo, it wasn't like anything very something that folks can tend to be skeptical of. It was very just sit, notice what's coming up. And I would always go to, and this, my immediate thing was like, all right, what do I do with this? Like, what's the next step? It's like needing to know what to do next with it. And and the fact that just sitting with it and letting myself decide what to do with it was uncomfortable for me. It was like, oh, there's no protocol for this. There's no guidelines on what I'm supposed to do next. So there's something empowering about that, but also something also very uncomfortable about it, because we've never been in that position where we feel like we have that power to decide what to do next, if that makes sense. So why did you feel that was important to bring into your trainings?
Well, I had some key experiences with my own work as a vegan where I felt like I needed that mindfulness support, and I was so grateful to have had that in my life. I had one of my first kitchens that I walked into. So I had never been in a commercial kitchen other than my grandpa's butcher shop, but like never in a hotel or restaurant before I started working with restaurants. And one of the first hotels I went into, we took a tour of the kitchen. The executive chef was super excited to share with me all the things he was doing. And he had made this I think it was like a cashew cheese that he was super excited about. And this was cool because it was before a lot of places had vegan options and we had connected. So he gave me this whole tour of the kitchen. And as we're walking through the kitchen, there's a dead chicken defrosting in the sink. And it took me aback. I looked, I was like, I had a physical reaction to it, but the chef is still blabbering away, talking about all this great stuff. And I'm like, wait a second, like what's going on here? I have to pay attention to what this person's saying and not be fazed by what I just saw. And, obviously I'm allowed to have a reaction, but then not necessarily have that reaction affect the rest of our conversation. So I managed my emotions, I validated my emotions, and I noticed that had happened to me, that I experienced that. And then after that happened, I, sat with it and thought about how I felt about being in spaces where that was going to be a thing, because I knew that wasn't going to be the first time, and it certainly wasn't the first time. And I had to learn how to manage being around things that were uncomfortable and feeling uncomfortable, sometimes in sudden ways. And I know that the mindfulness training supported me in that. I mean, when I first learned about practicing mindfulness, I was in social work school and I would take the subway to work, and sometimes I'd have an hour-long subway train ride, and they're very busy trains with so many people and sometimes parents screaming at their kids. And so I made it a habit to actually practice mindfulness on the trains on my way to work. And I would just sit there in the midst of all this chaos, breathing and noticing my thoughts and my feelings and letting it go. And it felt sometimes like I was the only person on the train. Like I was just able to block it all out. And that's what I utilize when I'm in these moments. Another moment that comes to mind is when I was having a menu evaluation with this restaurant manager and chef. And I asked them, what are your best-selling dishes? And the chef was like, lamb. And then it was like some chicken wrap, bacon. It was like every animal you can think of in one dish. And it was like, oh, I couldn't show my disgust on my face because I was there to help them make vegan options. So I took this chance and I just was like, okay, I'm gonna take a deep breath. And then I responded consciously. And I said, how do you season the lamb? Tell me about the flavors. And that is such an odd sentence to come out of a vegan's mouth, but that allowed us to create things for the vegan menu that were going to be symbolic of the flavors that the chef was really proud of, and give the chef ownership over the vegan menu. And this is the work that I do, the work that I teach people to do. But it is so impossible, I would think, to have that kind of conversation without being in touch with my own emotions and without being able to think beyond myself and my own outrage at the situation, that there's an actual lamb on a menu, to think beyond my outrage in the moment and think about the big picture and remember, okay, hold on, like we have a bigger mission here and we're going to make that mission happen. But I have to actually be able to put my emotions in check in this moment, and then of course deal with it after. Like if you have those experiences and then you want to go home and cry as a vegan activist, do that, like process your feelings. You don't have to put it away, but in the moment, it is helpful to be able to at least acknowledge your feeling and then move from it in the moment so you can move on to what's most helpful for you along the lines of your mission in that situation.
Yeah, and I think this is also a good opportunity to practice visioning if you're going to go into this sort of space beforehand, think of the different scenarios and how you would react, so you sort of go in prepared. Yeah, because I would also wonder when I started the Nourished by Shriya, my little creation from being mentored by you, which I never thought I would call myself a founder, and it was just like, whoa, that's me. I did that, and I did that with your help. But while launching that and having the social media presence and having to follow other restaurants where they feature animal bodies on their plates, and it's so hard to see, and there's a part of me, it's like, how do I engage in activism here? Like, should I there are two ways I could handle this, and when I'd reached out to you about this, the incredible advice that you gave was, all right, apart from sitting with what I'm feeling and allowing myself to feel that, what's going to be the best way to show up and interact with these restaurants and say, hey, do you have an animal-free or like a plant-based version of this? That, like, there's so many delicious products that don't require using animals, so like, have you considered adding that to the menu for your plant-based customers to enjoy? So kind of sparking that sort of conversation without being like, you horrible animal murderers, like, which is going to be the first because when I see the comments of people going like, oh, that looks so good, yum, like, I just want to lash out on everybody, but
it's hard. And like I said, sometimes I do, I'm not always going to respond the most mindfully. Like sometimes I lash out but it never goes well. And I'm always like, oh yeah, that's why I don't do that very often. Yeah. But I think also remembering to give other people the benefit of the doubt, like having the best expectations for other people. So like, you have to imagine they're good. You have to really believe that these people are good people. And it's so hard for people to get to. It's so hard for us to remember that these could be good people making bad choices based on a lack of information or based on past experiences or whatever it is. But I'll give you an example just from yesterday. I was on a Facebook group. So I don't live in Aruba anymore. I live in Florida, and I'm still on this Aruban Facebook group. And oftentimes people post about restaurants and talk about like, where's the best steakhouse, and post all the steakhouse. And like, yeah, it makes me want to vomit looking at those comments, but it gives me information and helps me do a better job as an activist. And so like, someone posted a picture of a new restaurant that came out, and they had a lot of vegetarian options, but no vegan options. And they posted a picture of this eggplant with cheese all over it. And so I just commented and I said, so wonderful that you opened up with so many vegetarian options. That means you have so many great vegetables at your disposal. So I would love to see you have some clearly labeled vegan options on your menu so that vegans can enjoy your food too. Yeah. And then I get a response, the owner of the restaurant comments back and he says, we have lots of vegetarian options clearly labeled. Check out our menu. Like, he didn't even understand the word vegan. He just was like, we do have vegetarian options. What are you talking about? Yeah. And then I wrote back to him, that's so great, but I'm actually talking about vegan options. And so then he said, I'm going to private message you. And he private messaged me, and he was like, someone else stopped by the other day and asked about vegan options that, thanks for bringing that up. And I said, well, by the way, I know someone who, I have someone who I trained actually now who lives in Aruba. And I was like, I know someone who helps restaurants create vegan options, and she'd be happy to talk to you about it. And he's like, let's do it, and he was so into it. And so now she's going to be meeting with him to talk about working on a vegan menu with this restaurant. And sometimes it's just so easy if you just come at it with the right approach and actually expect people to be open to it if you just give them the right information. Not all, sometimes there's people with biases and everything, but I would say, at least in the hospitality sector, for the most part, people want to please their customers. And so they are going to do things that are going to benefit their customers. And if they see that there's customers asking for something, they don't really have a reason to reject it. They have a reason to support it because people are going to be paying them for that. So yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of positive experiences like that, where if I'm able to check myself and focus on the positive and expect that they're doing their best, then it has worked out a lot for me, as you can see.
Yeah, clearly. And that actually reminds me of this really funny story that a friend of mine here in St. Louis, also an activist, had mentioned, just how even if you don't do hospitality consulting, like how you can get restaurants to think about actually adding solid vegan options on their menu. Like you just call a restaurant that he knows is not vegan friendly at all and being like, oh, hey, like we're like a party of 30 people coming in. So like, do you do reservations, blah, blah, blah. And like, they get really excited and they're like, oh yeah, like, of course. Cause like, 30 people coming in, heck yes. Like, we'll try to make this work. And it's like, oh, just before we make the reservations, you're the spot that does like the Beyond Burgers and you have like a vegan cheese option, right? And then the person on the line is like, no, that's not us. And it's like, oh, sorry, I guess I got the wrong restaurant. We're a group of vegans. So yeah, I thought this was the spot that had, the new vegan burgers. So sorry. And then it's like, it gets them thinking like, oh shoot, there's a group of 30 vegans that we could have been feeding. So I was like, oh, that's actually
great.
Yeah. So I think do you think that, there are other ways that even if you're not into hospitality, that as activists still show up in the restaurant space and within the hospitality industry to really showcase that demand for these items?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's nobody better than the customer to make those demands. So something I used to do and that I encourage people to do is go to an area where there's a lot of restaurants where you can actually walk around and encounter several restaurants within a walking path, and literally just go to every host stand and say, hey, do you have any vegan options? What's on your menu? And then if they say no, you have two choices. You can, be dramatic about it and be like, oh, that's terrible. Like, I would have loved to eat here. Like, I would love to throw my money at you,
Yeah, it's like
if you
it's
just
2021.
basically, right. Like, basically, like, create, like, this. Oh, how I would have loved, like, I have my whole, just like you said, like, my family was going to come here tonight and I guess we're going to have to go somewhere else. Oh, well. So that's like one option. But then the other option is to actually asked to speak to a decision maker, and usually that's a manager or an owner, and to say, oh, you don't have any vegan options, I'd love to speak to your manager about how they might create some, and then ask to speak with the manager and just find out why they don't have vegan options. The first thing I suggest is that people ask questions rather than assume. So instead of saying you need vegan options, you say, I noticed you don't have any vegan options. That's so disappointing because that means I can't eat here and I'm so curious. Why don't you? And then I would ask, am I the first person that's asked for vegan food, or have you gotten other requests? And like, what are the obstacles you're facing? What's making it hard for you to put vegan food on your menu? Because maybe it's like, they don't know what vegan food is, or they don't know where to find vegan cheese, or they have misconceptions about it. Maybe they think it's expensive, or maybe they think there's not enough demand for it. So you can, as a vegan person, a customer, help clear up those issues. And especially if you're part of a vegan community where you have the community behind you that would actually come and eat food if there was a vegan option, then you can tell them that. You can say, I'm part of a vegan Facebook group with 500 people. And as soon as I post in there, I know they're going to be running to your door if you have good vegan food. So what they can do, is encourage them. You can also connect them with a hospitality consultant. I have trained now over 60 people in 18 different countries, I think 17 US states. So if you're curious where the consultants are, you can look on the Vegan Hospitality website, and they're not all listed there, but I would say the most active people are listed there. And then you can also reach out to me and I'll tell you if there's a consultant in your neighborhood, because then you can hook them up with a restaurant and get like a really professional, solid vegan menu there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's there's so many creative ways to revolutionize the restaurant space. So like vegan supporting vegans, it's so powerful. And of course, like like you said, even if there's one solid vegan item at a restaurant, we're going to go check it out and we're going to bring more people. So
have you talked about the restaurant that you worked with on this podcast? Like, have you told the listeners that you actually helped create a vegan menu?
I guess we're switching roles now. Yeah, well, thanks to your fabulous training and the interaction skills that I had learned from you, I had reached out to a local spot called the London Tea Merchant. It's a British themed cafe here in St. Louis, Missouri. And yeah, they get a lot of requests for vegan options, but they had, I think, one or two. They had like a chai spice brownie and a rotating scone flavor, both of which were doing well. But when compared to the plethora of other items that they had on their menu, it was like, okay, we've got our token vegan dishes. And so I had they had posted about their weekend afternoon tea service that they would offer on the weekends. And so I had asked them like, oh, do you do a vegan version? That would be so fun. And do you get requests for vegan items? And they had responded saying, yeah, we do. And then I remember immediately reaching out to you, being like, Meredith, someone responded to me. I don't know, like, what should I tell them? And then you would ask me, like, what do you want to tell them? And I was like, I was expecting an answer. I was not expecting to come up with this on my own. But I mean, that was a lot of how I got to learn to be a lot more independent in making decisions. So yeah, I was like, wow, well, that's really cool. And the conversation went on from there, and I pitched the work that I do and the training, and I got to meet with them one-on-one. And they were super excited. Like, one of the managers was vegetarian, so, kind of understood what the goal was, and they didn't even require that much explaining as to the benefits of having a 100% plant-based menu also being offered, and making some of their like their aiolis and dips and spreads vegan by default, or creating making all their vegetarian items be completely vegan by default. But if they wanted to opt into dairy, cheese, or whatnot, that could be an option, but it was going to be plant-based by default, which was really cool. And yeah, but the pandemic also made it hard on their budgeting end. So I also was in the situation where I was like, either offer the entire package, or I could sort of cater it to just say, okay, I'm going to just do a custom thing. I'm only going to do a menu evaluate. I'm only going to develop some recipes for you, and I'll throw in free social promotions. And then I was like, and you also get a first customer discount, because I was like, I want to work with a restaurant, period. And yeah, then from there we had, now the London Tea Merchant offers a vegan afternoon tea service with pastries and finger sandwiches, and you can enjoy the whole cuppa experience with either oat milk. I think they have soy and almond as well.
So good. I love seeing the pictures. I wish I could go. I gotta come to St. Louis.
Oh, please
Try
do.
it, but it looks so good.
And their baker's so talented. Like, they would get creative with the recipes that I provided, and like, I would give some suggestions as well. Like, you can swap this in for, like, if you want to do a hazelnut buttercream or a strawberry buttercream. And then, like, they would get creative from that and try different things. And it was so wonderful to see that. And I remember posting on Facebook, like, hey, like, what are you doing this weekend? You can enjoy a vegan afternoon tea service here. And one of the event coordinators there had commented saying, hey, since then we've actually expanded our vegan dessert offering, so now we're rotating with more vegan desserts for our afternoon tea, which made me really happy. And I guess the fact that people were going in and enjoying it was so wonderful. And I remember going in to check in just to see how it was going, and it was perfect timing, because there was a plant-based couple there who they had just gotten their pastry tier delivered to their table. So I got to go chat with them real quick and get some photos, and they were really sweet and kind and really appreciative of having that. And they even messaged me on Facebook after, and I was like, oh,
such a rewarding feeling to go and see people eating food that you advocated for.
I know. And just It was a rewarding experience indeed, and I'm so glad that you created that. It just started out of you wanting to go to restaurants and wanting to have delicious food that wasn't a salad with things removed or spaghetti marinara that's like $20. You out of what you wanted and wanting to make sure that vegans are happily fed as well, you started something that is only going to go upwards from here. So I'm so excited for all of that. So thank you. I have you to thank for just anything and everything. And I'm so tempted not to take this into a Shriya therapy session.
Well, I think it was inevitable that someone was going to create this kind of thing. I mean, I've had since starting it, I've trained 60 people, and I've had way more people reach out to me that want to do the program that just like it wasn't a good fit or the right time or the right budget. But hundreds of people around the world are having this idea around the same time, wanting to do this kind of work. And not everyone's going to do it in the same way. And I think that's great. I want people to take the lessons I've learned and then make it their own, because every community is different. And that's, like I said, part of the reason I wanted to train people is so they can make it their own in their own communities for the best fit for that culture and that situation. But I think there's lots of people working on this in different ways. And I think we're at the very beginning of this kind of movement, the hospitality, plant-based hospitality. I think there's a big sustainability focus on it as well within the hospitality field, because I see, I joined a hospitality conference that's coming up this week, and I've done lectures for hospitality industry professionals, and they're really interested in sustainability and how can they reduce their carbon footprint and, get their sustainability targets in line. So I do think that that's an entry point for activists as well, especially if you're speaking to the hospitality industry or the travel industry, is talking about the sustainability goals.
Totally. And again, one of the things that really makes your course stand out from, just the plant-based or sustainability angles, the vegan angle, it truly goes with the ethic, and it goes past just the food. Like we talk about, at hotels and spas and stuff where, there's leather, silk, wool, down, like the things that maybe are often overlooked, really talk about all of that. And we're trained to have these conversations. And that's so important because veganism is not a diet.
A community. I mean, I also only train vegans. So I only accept vegans into the program. There's been like a one-off, vegetarian that I've asked them to, like, they're on their vegan journey. And I've said, you must commit to being vegan during the course of the program. And that's helped them get into their, vegan lifestyle. But there are people who want to do vegan consulting that are not vegans. I've had people reach out to me, like they're like kind of plant-based and they want to see more healthy options. And I'm like, this isn't the right fit for you, because people who join this program, I would say, mostly identify as ethical vegans who want to use this as a form of activism, or to contribute to their activism journey. And so I want to make a safe space for vegans to be able to express their frustration, their angers, their emotional experiences related to doing this work.
100%. And yeah, like you said, it's not a diet. It's an ethical and moral philosophy of living. So that's one of the things that we really want to hone in on. So yeah, I know that we're running we're coming close to our end. So before I let you go, and maybe I'll resume picking your brain outside of this podcast, what does a just vegan world look like to you? How do you envision that?
I love to envision that. I hope it happens in my lifetime. I hope it happens in my daughter's lifetime, for her and for my next kid. I'm pregnant right now. I would love to see a vegan world. I think that a vegan dominant world is actually inevitable. I don't know what a completely vegan world would look like. And I do think that that's really just because we have, we live in a world where we are in community with animals. And we are human animals. And so I do think there eventually is going to be some sort of like symbiotic relationship that might involve death, with either the human or the animal. So I don't know, but I do think that we're going to go toward a vegan dominant world. I think that especially within hospitality, that's going to be a leader in this. I think that we're going to have plant-based hospitality sector before we have a plant-based farming sector, because mostly the government is going to be continuing to subsidize farms. They have not kept up with the the trends, the demands as veganism rises in the developed world. The government still subsidizes dairy farms and bails them out, and doesn't subsidize vegetables. So I do believe we're going to actually have a lot of food waste before we balance it out. But I think that we are going to have many more vegan people. We're going to have many more completely vegan restaurants, completely like hotel chains, food chains are going to go vegan, plant-based. But I think that what we need to see, and what I do have a vision for in my vegan world, is vegans in positions of power in every sector. So like we need vegans in the education system, changing from, kindergarten to college, changing the policies and the way that we teach kids. And I think that's a huge part of it. I think we need vegans in the healthcare system, in the mental health care system. We need vegans in politics and policymaking and hospitality. But I just think that we need to not just be active like on the grassroots community level, but actually in whatever field we're in. So like if you're an activist and you think, okay, well, I need to go do outreach, I need to go, do something specifically vegan to be an activist, I actually would challenge you to think about the spaces you already occupy, whether that's professional spaces or community spaces, and how can you actually bring vegan activism into that space? Because veganism needs to be everywhere in order to actually create a vegan world. I think that eventually it needs to become illegal for animal cruelty to exist. Like I think I'm a big believer in laws. So I know we can't have our laws justify morality, but I think it does play a role in just our being able to be effective advocates, because it's just so much easier to say, well, you're breaking the law than to be like, well, we know it's legal to go to the supermarket and buy a steak, but you shouldn't do that. It just, we don't have a lot of validity there. It's just very hard to start arguing ethics with people because people have different ethics, they live by different values. So I do have a vision for animal cruelty becoming illegal. I do think that's going to start with large factory farms. I think probably we're going to have limits on the size of farms. So we'll see farms. I feel like I'm predicting the future right now. I know.
Like
I think that's what you asked me to do.
I think we're going to roadmap. So
yeah, okay. I think we'll start having policies that limit the size of farms and limit the size of slaughterhouses. So we're going to have to they're going to have to switch to small scale, which is going to make it less accessible and more expensive to have meat, which will be great. And eventually, hopefully, we can eliminate animal agriculture completely or mostly. Yeah. And I also think a big piece of this is just having a more equitable world for everyone in general. So I do not see a vegan world where we have people who are hungry or people living in poverty or people who are being discriminated against. I think we need people to have homes and healthcare, and I think it's all connected. So I don't believe in only advocating for animal liberation as a way to create a vegan world, because I just don't think it's possible to liberate animals. And like I think it's so connected that we need to have both of those things happening at the same time. Just the way our system runs, I think that it's going to be better for everyone if we can work toward a more equitable and more just world, a more safe world, a more peaceful world, healthier world for everyone. Mm-hmm. So that includes people of all kinds all over the world. And I think it's all going to have to happen at the same time to really get to the place we want to be. So that's my vision. It sounds like a lot of work.
More like a prediction, like a very
prediction.
This is gonna happen, and this is gonna happen.
Yeah, I would love to see it happen. I really hope I get to see a lot of it happen. I think I will. And we want to celebrate all the wins along the way.
We're seeing things happen. I don't know what necessarily is happening, but things are happening.
Oh, we see things happening with fur industry. We see things happening with animal testing. I think things are happening and it's all connected, and we have to celebrate the wins along the way. I mean, I see within the hospitality industry, I know, vegan capitalism isn't going to save the world. However, it is a part of it. In my opinion, it's a part of it because I think we do need veganism to be accessible in order and acceptable. And then that's my mission with my business, is to have plant-based foods be accessible to everyone, affordable, and also be acceptable, meaning that it's part of our culture in a fun and nice and exciting and trendy way. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we can have a world where animals are liberated where we don't have other food for people to eat. So we do need to have vegan food in order for people to stop eating animals. So it does go hand in hand, but I already see it happening, that part of it at least.
100%. Thank you so much, Meredith. This was, I'm sure people at this point can clearly see why I gush about you so much and why I admire and respect and look up to you. And I'm immensely grateful that I can call my fairy god mentor also one of my closest friends.
This was one of the most fun podcast conversations I've ever had. I love all the questions you ask. I mean, you're so thoughtful. I love chatting with you.
Yes, always. I love chatting with you too. And it's just, I really appreciate how we can just have an organic conversation and it doesn't feel loaded. It's just, oh, I'm talking to Meredith today, and it always sets a positive tone to my day. So thank you. Is there anything else that you want to let our listeners know?
Just to reach out to me if you want to, if you connected with something I said, if you want to chat. I love meeting new people. That's really why I'm on social media, is for the connection. I don't do a lot of posting anymore. Like, I don't know. I really love to chat with people and connect and answer questions and support. So if you want to connect, you want to chat about anything, mindfulness related, vegan related, activism, hospitality, you can find me at Meredith Marin, or you can go to @vegan.hospitality, and Instagram is my main method of communication. So you're welcome to reach out. And yeah, I would just love to meet you if you're a listener.
Yeah. And I mean, we also have impromptu dance parties, just saying.
True. We haven't done that in a while though. I have to do that again. Yeah. Zoom dance parties are the best.
Once the new vegan little one is out, we'll celebrate with a little dance party.
Yeah. Or maybe we could do that to celebrate the launch of this episode. Whenever this episode comes out, we could be like, let's do a dance party. So let me know.
Absolutely. We will get that in the books. Well, thank you so much, Meredith, and congratulations on all of the things you're doing, your new pregnancy, and hoping for a healthy baby and a future plant-powered activist coming our way.
Exactly. Thank you, Shriya.
Thank you. One of the best things about Meredith is that she naturally creates a space for respectful, thought-provoking discussions. And I really hope you all enjoyed that conversation that we had. Meredith emanates compassion, and even the most generic chats with her end up having valuable words of wisdom to it. So if you're inspired to be trained as a vegan hospitality consultant like I did, or work with Meredith on your own mental and emotional wellness journey, be sure to check out the links to her websites and socials that we will provide in the description box below. Plus, her social media is probably where you'll get the deets about the dance party that will be accompanying the launch of this episode. And you do not want to miss out on that fun. If you enjoyed this episode and our podcast, please rate and review the Animal Liberation Hour, as it helps others find us more easily, and the more people who find out about us, the more they can be inspired by our guests and turn that inspiration into actionable change for the animals. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast and all things AAM, including our upcoming week of animal rights action in Atlanta, Georgia, from February 19th till 26th. So if you want more information on that, be sure to check out our events page on Facebook. You can also hop in on our clubhouse rooms and join our stimulating discussions about all things animal rights, effective advocacy, and more. If you like what we do at the Animal Liberation Hour and at Animal Activism Mentorship, you can support us through our Patreon at patreon.com/animalactivismmentorship. It helps keep us going and amplifying the voices of our community members. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. We hope you will join our positive community of creative, inspiring, and dedicated activists in our move for animal liberation. We will catch you on our next episode. Until next time.